Hi, everybody, and welcome back to yet another cracking edition of the Matt Brown Show. This is the Secrets of Influence series, where we are talking about influence and business leadership. And this is obviously off the back of my latest book, Secrets of Influence, which you can now get on Amazon. And with us in the hot seat today is none other than Frank Clark. He is the president and CEO of Encore Leadership Advisors and also an executive search firm. Frank, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Matt. Good to be with you.
Yeah, man, it's really a privilege as all mine. So tell me, let's kick us off with the elevator pitch. Fill our audience in around the world on exactly what you guys are doing there.
Sure. Encore Leadership Advisors is a senior level executive search firm. And what we do is we solve complex talent solution problems for our clients when it comes to the C-suite, as well as functional roles like financial roles as far as a CFO, a operations role such as a COO, and the like. So we solve complex talent solution issues for our clients with really what I would call elegant solutions.
Okay, beautiful. So let's get into the meat and the potatoes here of this series, Frank. You're obviously an influencer, I would suggest, because of what you do. You're working with private equity firms, you're working with CEOs. And so influence, I imagine, is quite an important currency for you to be effective at what you do as a business leader. But I'm curious for you to unpack for us from your perspective, what is influence? How would you personally define it?
Love that question. Certainly a provocative one. Influence, from my vantage point, Matt, is impacting change, impacting perhaps even growth of a company, certainly impacting the executive suite when it comes to a diverse set of ideas, a diverse set of talent when it comes to experiences, and a diverse set of executives when it comes to ethnicity and backgrounds as well. That is certainly influence coupled with what I would call impact.
Okay, beautiful stuff. And so why, from your perspective, because I think you're sitting in quite a unique context, why, is influence important today for business leaders?
It's important today because it moves the needle forward. It impacts the economy. It impacts GDP. It certainly impacts the lives of many employees and constituents and organizations that are part of the ecosystem of that organization. So influence is, I would say, one of the most important things that a leader has, and one of the most profound responsibilities as well.
Where do you think this whole conversation around influence and business leadership goes wrong, or where it's mostly misunderstood?
It can be misunderstood in a variety of ways. Sometimes leaders can misunderstand it as a carte blanche to do things that are off the beaten path, that perhaps can be considered corruption, can be considered certainly unethical. So it can go wrong when the leader doesn't understand what their purpose and assignment is around influence and what the true meaning of it is. And from the outside looking in, it can be perceived as someone with more power than they perhaps are ready for, or more responsibility than that they are ready for, and perhaps even perceived as someone who has inequities, right? So the underserved communities, Black, Brown, Asian, Hispanic executives, can look at influence from the outside in as an inequitable kind of situation and scenario, which certainly is not the case, but it can be perceived that way.
Couldn't agree with you more. Frank, could you share a personal story of how you work with influence to achieve outcomes that are beneficial for some of your clients, for example? Maybe it's, as a personal story, that's something that happened to you recently where you succeeded, or to your point, when it comes to influence, it's a double-sided coin, a story where influence was wielded incorrectly and there was a negative impact.
Sure. I'll give you a positive side of that coin first. We've had several opportunities to impact clients' C-suite and their strategic trajectory and outlook for the future, near and long term. Having said that, we were tasked with bringing in executives from the outside with different sets of experiences, different sets of resumes, if you will, when it comes to background and expertise. And we went through a large slate of candidates, narrowed it down to three, and all three candidates were diverse in nature, in experiences, diverse in nature in backgrounds, and diverse in nature in ethnicity as well. And it's driving significant growth, operational disciplines and rigor, cultural transformation, influence around employee satisfaction and fulfillment for this organization. So that's a great story of how influence in what we do can drive significant and positive change with growth trajectory, as well as cultural transformation and overall employee satisfaction.
Yeah, that's really, really important. Hey, tell me something. As an advisory firm, so to speak, and obviously you're doing executive search and that kind of stuff. What's how important is thought leadership to you as a team?
Yeah, thought leadership is one of our points of difference. We advise our clients on market trends. We advise our clients on industry trends, and we certainly advise our clients on the best talent in the world that's appropriate and germane for the roles that they're seeking to fill. So thought leadership is how we differentiate ourselves in the marketplace to drive value to our clients and be really additive.
Mm-hmm. You touched on a couple of examples there around thought leadership, but I'd love for you to double click on, your current thought leadership strategy. As an example, if you're advising, business leaders around trends, around executive search, as an example, what other activities are you doing around the thought leadership piece specifically to drive influence on social media, LinkedIn, and so forth?
Sure. When it comes to social media, LinkedIn is certainly a platform that we use. We do what I would call lunch and learns about different subject matters in the workplace. One could be diversity and executives in the boardroom. One could be women executives in the boardroom, and how to go about becoming a board of director for a private company or a publicly traded company. That's certainly a thought leadership piece on social media. Another way that we drive influence on social media is we talk about the latest trends in financial services, the latest trends in industry projections in private equity. So we use social media as a platform to do that.
Mm-hmm. Do you do podcast tours, or are you speaking on show? Obviously you're doing this one, but do you have your own show as an example? Like, what other sorts of media platforms or channels over and above social media do you guys specifically work with to scale your influence?
Yes, we don't have our own podcast, but we participate in fireside chats. We participate in conferences as keynote speakers. We certainly participate in local and regional print media. It is how we drive and get to our audiences and our constituents and our listeners when it comes to thought leadership.
Frank, what's your advice to other business leaders around how to approach thought leadership? Are there specific experiences that you've had, or do you see things working better than other things, for instance, within social media or on other channels? I'm just curious for you to share your advice with other business leaders around how to do thought leadership more effectively, because oftentimes I found that thought leadership is largely misunderstood. You might have an executive that runs, or a business leader that goes over to ChatGPT and says, write me a thought leadership article, which isn't exactly thought leadership because thought leadership has to have a unique point of view. It has to be non-obvious. It has to be data-led or evidence-based in many cases. So I'm curious to get your advice to other business leaders around thought leadership.
Yes. My thinking on that, Matt, is thought leadership comes from a couple of different lanes. One is your own experiences, an experience set. Another area that it comes from is your constant maniacal focus on learning and developing from a personal and professional perspective. And then the last piece is surrounding yourself with dynamic, leading edge thought leaders. That's where the intellectual capital comes from. That's where the intellectual prowess and horsepower comes from. And delivering that is certainly something you have to be very discriminating on and extraordinarily selective around how you deliver that thought leadership. And what I have found to be most effective is podcast is one way to deliver great thought leadership. Podcasts focus on areas where you have great expertise, like this one with you, Matt. Also, another way to deliver it and make sure it's communicated to the appropriate audience with the right content and messaging is certainly through social media, but probably through a communication specialist that has the right training, right background, the right expertise to deliver the message in a thoughtful and compelling way. And the last thing I would say about thought leadership when it comes to delivery and platform is brevity. Brief, concise, but compelling and germane to that audience.
Yeah, it's really interesting. One of the things I think people, again, misunderstand about influencers, my clients actually came to me and they said, we have this podcast. Can you help us with strategy and this kind of stuff? And I was like, yeah, of course. And then I said to them, why are you doing a podcast? And they were like, well, we're doing a podcast because we want to be seen as thought leaders. And the interesting thing about podcasting specifically when it comes to influence is that when you are the host of your show, right? Like me, I'm hosting, I'm interviewing you. Who's the expert here, would you say? Is it me or you?
Right.
And the answer is you, right? You're the expert because I'm interviewing you. And so this is, again, another thing that's largely misunderstood. If you're a podcast host, you're not a thought leader. It's a way for you to facilitate a conversation, grow your network, and contribute and create content and what have you. But you need to be on other shows. In other words, it's the same thing with speaking, like you mentioned speaking, right? So if you're speaking, who's the expert? You know what I mean? At a conference or whatever. Is it the guy in the seats or is it the guy on the stage? And so the media platform for a podcast is the stage. And so I'm almost moderating, but you're the expert. And I think it's a very important thing for people to understand that podcasting isn't a way for you to be a thought leader. It's just not. And in my book, I actually write about this thing called the H3 content model. So you have H1 at the top is hero content. That's what you were saying. True thought leadership, trends, data, evidence, all that stuff you were doing. And then H2 is hub. And that's podcast interviews, you being on other shows or you having your own show and facilitating conversations. And then the final H is hygiene, where you take hero content and hub content and you recycle it into like an arsenal of short content for people to digest so that you can start to scale your influence. But it's a very important thing. So I'm curious, how do you approach getting onto shows? Do you work with podcast booking agencies? What have you learned about specifically, being booked on podcasts to position yourself as an expert and influencer?
I think for us, we've been invited to podcasts based on our social media presence, based on the reputation that we have in the marketplace, and certainly based on our network of professionals and influencers across North America is how we have been invited and how we've found podcasts to be very valuable to us.
Yeah, it's I was off social media for a whole year, and then with my other book that came out, Secrets of Fail, we put out 300 digital videos and assets and stuff like that over a period of about 15 business days. And then within 7 days, I was booked for 7 podcasts, just purely from having a robust presence in the market over a period of time. It was really interesting.
That is.
Mm-hmm. So, Frank, who's been the most influential mentor to you over your career and why?
I would say the most influential mentor to me over my career has been my father. My father started at a utility company when he was a very young man in his early 20s as a mailroom delivery clerk and did that for many years, almost a full decade, and went from the mailroom all the way to becoming chairman, president, and CEO of this same organization over a 3.5 decade period and was CEO for a little north of 12 plus years. So over the years, I've had the privilege, I've had the good fortune, and have been blessed to have had that tutelage to kind of see that journey and what it requires when it comes to work ethic, when it comes to resilience, when it comes to collaboration with others, when it comes to putting in the study behind the scenes. I grew up seeing that journey literally from delivering mail to being a major corporate CEO of the largest utility company in the United States. So I would say that would be my most compelling, most substantive and meaningful mentor that I've had.
It's an amazing story. You don't hear that story very often. So I want to double click on that. What's the greatest lesson do you think your father ever taught you?
Two things. Your word means something. Keep it. Keep it sacred. And the other piece that I've learned from him over the years is there may be people that have fancier degrees or even perhaps more talent. But if you have tremendous work ethic and you learn every day and you're willing to listen and then be about execution, you can accomplish great things even above folks that have maybe a fancier degree and or more talent in the specific area.
Mm. It sounds to me like your father was a great influencer, but he was also a great leader.
Yeah,
Curious to get your view. Like, what kind of leadership qualities do you feel business influencers need to have in order to be effective?
sure. The main quality you need to have to be effective as a business leader is you've got to have this ability to capture the hearts, the minds, and the imaginations of the people that you're leading. If you can capture all three of those, people will follow you through fire, rain, wind, storms, and sunshine because you've captured all three key pillars of what drives human behavior: hearts, minds, and the imagination. So that to me is the best quality in the best leaders in the world, to be able to do those things and do them consistently. And also while doing that, show people that you're not only about results and winning, you also care about them as well.
What's the secret, though? I mean, I love that imagination, hearts, and minds. I love that, so I'm going to steal it. But but what's the secret to that? Because do you think it's authenticity? Do you think it's how one communicates? Do you think it's storytelling? What do you feel is the secret to capturing imaginations, hearts, and minds of those people that you're trying to influence?
A couple different components. Being comfortable in your own strengths is key, because that shows authenticity, to your point. Being comfortable in your own strengths and being able to settle in those and communicate those. Being self deprecating is a powerful tool as well, because it helps you to relate to people, because we all have our own frailties and insecurities as well. So being self deprecating with confidence, though, goes a long way in influencing someone. And I would say the last piece is, and I mentioned it earlier, Matt, is this whole piece about not just being extraordinarily competent, but also caring about the people that you're leading, caring about their interests, caring about their ambitions, caring about their development, caring about their families, and actually being able to communicate that in a very sincere, genuine way.
Mm. How do you know what to communicate though? Or how did, because you touched on it, like you said, your skill set or something like that? Because oftentimes people, they want to become seen, or they want to be seen as thought leaders. They just don't know where to start. We touched on channels and podcasts, all that kind of stuff. But from a communication perspective, when it comes to winning hearts, minds, and capturing imaginations and things like that, where does one start? What do you think the genesis is? If you think about this idea of a thought leadership platform, something that you will consistently talk about. Imagine if you had a point of view, for instance, that was designed to capture the imagination of people. And then there were like three things that you consistently evangelized. Do you know what I mean? So that's, because to your point, you have to be consistent. You have to be authentic. How does one figure out what that sort of thought leadership platform should be? And where does one start?
Yeah. You start with the culture of the company, of the organization, kind of what makes the heartbeat of that organization. That's where you start. So if it's around being collegial, you start by talking about the importance of working collaboratively across the organization. And you pick platforms that give you some kind of ubiquity around your messaging. As an example, a platform can be town hall meetings where you reinforce the pillars and the value add components of being collaborative, being collegial, being candid. And you use that platform in a town hall to reiterate that to the masses of your organization. You also can communicate it to the management team that works with you and for you. So they take that messaging that you have to the masses as well and within their specific lanes. And that certainly permeates across the organization, Matt. So that's another way. Your direct report should also be speaking and singing the same tune and the same language that you're speaking. And the last thing that I would say is when you're encountering people just by walking around, if you will, and managing and leading in your office or by Zoom, you reiterate it every single opportunity you can to that specific audience. That could be an audience of one, that can be an audience of 10, because what that does is that has a multiplier effect because they'll take that messaging, they'll take that galvanization and be your own evangelist and kind of spread the word on your behalf as well.
True influence is what people say to you when you say about you when you're not in the room.
That's it. Well said.
That's exactly right. Tell me, what's your advice to a business leader when it comes to scaling one's influence? In other words, if you think about, let's say you figured out what you wanted to say, who you wanted to say it to, you've aligned internally, all that stuff. Now it's about scale. What's your advice about scaling influence in today's business world?
Scaling influence is certainly challenging, but doable. And my advice to someone who wants to scale their influence is one, use technology to do it. Technology certainly democratizes the messaging and gives you a platform that again can reach the masses of people that you're targeting. So utilize technology to do it, whether it be an email message to your organization, whether it be a video message to your organization, or some other form of technology. Utilize that to scale your messaging around influence because, again, it does make it ubiquitous and democratizes the messaging. The other piece that I would say is if you have the opportunity to utilize media to do so, whether it be on print or on video, local, regional, or national media is a great way to scale your influence. And last but not least, conferences where you can participate in keynote speaking, or you can be at a round table and have a target audience to help scale your influence and messaging.
So just want to double click on that local media idea. How does one, like, because I'm curious about that. Obviously, I'm new to the US, relatively new. And then I recognize that there's like the local news in Colorado. Do you know what I mean? And how does one get access to those sorts of local media channels? Not necessarily CNBC,
Sure.
and the bigger ones and so forth, but how does one, get onto those local media channels?
Sure. If you've done a small town hall meeting, you can send them a video of that and say, hey, I'd love to have the opportunity to interview with you to see if this is something you're interested in doing a story about on your local channel. That's certainly a great way to do it, just that outreach. Another way, and probably a more orthodox way, is have an agent, have a PR person that kind of drives that for you locally, regionally, and then, of course, it could be national like a CNBC. Those are the two ways I would suggest.
So I'm definitely going to do that because one of the things that I want to do is speak at schools, right? It's about failure, and because I've touched on this before, but when you're at school, you're kind of trained to that failure is bad because if you get the grades wrong, you're not a grade A student, you're not going to go to college. So everything around grades and failure is bad. But if in the real business world, failure is a prerequisite to success. And so what I want to do is speak at schools. So you're saying is get into one school, record it, and then send it to like the local news station to get a feature on that. And then hopefully that will get picked up by the bigger networks.
That's exactly right.
Interesting. I'm going to do that. I'm going to feed back to you.
Yeah, please.
Is Frank Clark's strategy right?
I think that might work for you, Matt. I think that might work.
I think so. I think so. Why wouldn't it? Interesting stuff. Well, Frank, thank you so much for being on the series, buddy. And congrats on all your success and the incredible contribution that you're making to business leaders in from an advisory and executive search perspective. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Matt. Good to be with you.
Likewise. Everybody else, we'll see you again soon. Ciao for now.